Well, welcome to the Lyle Shelton Show, episode number 30, coming to you from The Good Source. What you've just heard were the radical voices of a handful of extremists in South Australia campaigning for the right to kill unborn babies all the way up until birth. Sadly, they got most of what they wanted in the South Australian Parliament last week. What you didn't hear were the voices of unborn babies, whose lives our society deems disposable. You didn't hear the voices of mothers and fathers who later regretted making what they came to see as an ill-informed choice to kill their unborn baby. And you certainly, at least in that protest, didn't hear from the victims of coerced abortions like Jaya Taki. Have a listen.
I was coerced into an abortion through emotional and psychological blackmail by my former NRL playing boyfriend.
Now, the good news of the South Australian abortion to birth bill is that Jaya Takis of this world actually were heard, and we'll hear about that in just a moment. But in Queensland and Victoria and New South Wales, when similar abortion to birth laws were put forward over recent years, the Jaya Takis were not listened to, and it's quite okay for a woman to be coerced to kill her unborn baby. And as a related aside, the Queensland Labor government is moving to criminalise coercive behaviour in the wake of the awful murder of Hannah Clark and her 3 children 1 year ago by a coercive husband. It will soon be illegal in Queensland for an abusive partner to control what a woman wears, but Labor here in Queensland refused amendments to its abortion to birth laws to criminalise a man for coercing a woman to kill her baby. Now, while abortion is an unspeakable tragedy, some positive gains, as I said before, were made by the South Australian pro-life community through last week's parliamentary debate. Recognising human rights for the unborn and real choices for their mothers is a game of inches, but I believe the tide is slowly turning. Now, joining me now is one of the organisers of the recent Adelaide March for Life, and they had 5,000 voices who were also largely ignored, but as I say, some important gains were made. And so joining me is Christopher Brohier of the Australian Christian Lobby. Christopher, thanks for joining me. Tell the audience what happened last week in the Parliament and what were some of the important wins that were made in spite of the loss of the bill.
So thanks, Lyle, and good to be here, and hi, everybody. So we had a marathon session in Parliament. Parliament sat till about 10 on Tuesday, till about 1:30 on Wednesday into Thursday morning, and then finally the debate finished at about 3 o'clock, 2:30 on Friday morning. So the bill was passed, but there were some significant changes that were made. So the first cab off the rank was that the attorney wanted a term that would allow abortion to birth if it was medically appropriate, and she scrapped that on her own volition because she saw that there was a resistance in the House, and she brought in a 3-fold test, which is very broad, but it was a change, and that was where the mother's life was in danger or one of multiple births, where there was serious risk of injury to the woman or her physical or mental health, and a third one, which I just can't quite remember.
Well, Christopher, just on that, this issue of abortion to birth, it sounds like that is starting to cut through, and you actually got some political traction where the pro-life movement was unable to convince Queensland, New South Wales and Victorian parliamentarians to pull short of abortion to birth. You've actually rung some concessions. So that has actually cut through.
Well, that's right. So that cut through, and then we had a unique provision enacted, which was moved by senior Labor MP, Stephen Mulligan. What he did was take the RANZCOG, the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. They have a guidelines when late-term abortion should occur, and there are things like where a fetus is going to be adversely affected in a multiple birth, where there are serious fetal anomalies, where there's, for example, if the person has been denied agency to continue a pregnancy by violence, etc. Now, those things, they're very broad, and we're not making too much of that, but what they do show is that this is a serious issue that has to be seriously considered, and there isn't open slather for the doctors to perform late-term abortions. And that symbolically was a significant win. The third aspect of that is that the attorney said, it's in Hansard, that if there was a 35-week gestation situation and the mum had mental health problems, that viability would trump the mum's mental health problems. Now, that's not in law, but that's in Hansard. And so, if
this is really significant, Christopher, and I know we want to get to the other concessions, but this issue of late-term abortion to birth, which the other states essentially allow virtually no questions asked. I mean, there's 2 doctors after a certain gestational period, but it's really just a rubber stamp. You guys have actually got recognition now in law that there's a problem with abortion to birth when there's not a serious threat to the life of the mother or the unborn baby.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a significant achievement. And what was the reaction of the pro-abortion lobby to the fact that they couldn't get abortion all the way to birth?
Well, in fact, they've got it, but they've got this.
Well, I should have said no questions asked. They wanted it, no questions asked. Yeah. You've actually, put some, okay, it's symbolism, but it isn't the open slather, which is what they wanted and got in the other states.
Yeah. Well, they're very angry. They're very angry with us. I think I'm public enemy number 1 in their stakes. They published pictures of me taken in the House. And they said, these people giving advice to these politicians, they're not doctors, etc., etc.
They're not allowed to take photographs in a parliament. What's that about?
Yeah, so I've made a formal complaint to the Speaker, and the Speaker has advised me that that's against the rules, and it's being investigated as a matter of priority.
So they're very angry. So that's on the late term. So there's about 4 other really important concessions that were won last week in what was still a terrible defeat for the pro-life movement. But as I said, it's a game of inches in clawing this back. And what were the other significant gains that you made?
So there was banning sex selection abortion.
Well done. Now we couldn't even stop that in New South Wales. The Berejiklian government wouldn't even ban sex selection abortion. So that's and certainly the Queenslanders wouldn't, and then every other state, you can kill a unborn baby just because it's a girl. And sadly, there's some cultures and religions that will do that. That's documented. So that's really significant, Christopher. Well done.
The second thing was the New South Wales provision, which says that the duty of care to a baby born alive as a result of termination is the same as in any other situation. So that was a good concession.
So in 2 states of Australia now, if a baby is born alive as a result of a botched abortion, that baby must be given medical care, not just left to die, which is the current practice.
Well, it's not that clear, because the question is the duty of care, and there are complicated situations about what's the state of the infant, etc. But it's there recognized. The humanity of this baby who's been born as a result of a termination is recognized. That's the important thing. And then it's up to us to make that work in practice.
Well, people should realise too that there are hundreds of documented cases of babies being born alive and left to die after abortion. So I just want our audience to be aware that what you've achieved is not just some theoretic. That's not a symbolic gesture. That's actually something that is real and will make a real difference potentially.
And simultaneously with that, on Wednesday in Federal Parliament, George Christensen introduced the exposure draft of his Born Alive bill, which is very, very important.
Right. And just after I speak to you, Christopher, George is coming on the show. So this is a really important pro-life edition of the Lyle Shelton Show. So
well, I'll just say, go big.
This is progress. Progress is being made. We often get despairing, and you and I have been around the pro-life movement for a long time. What we are seeing unfold last week and now this week are probably the biggest steps forward in the pro-life movement that I've seen in my involvement. I'm sure you'd say the same.
And then one of the biggest actual changes, which is seems small, but it's real, is the requirement to provide information about available counselling right at the get-go of a person seeking a termination. Now, the other states have, New South Wales has something about provision of counselling if asked, but in South Australia now, if you come after this bill becomes law, if you want an abortion, you'll get a piece of paper saying these are the counselling facilities available to you, and they, if the attorney is true to her word, they'll include things like pregnancy support and adoption, which now we have to hold the attorney to that. She said that in Hansard. So that's a very important step, because
so this is breaking the monopoly of the abortion industry on the provision of information to women when it comes to pregnancy decisions.
Yeah. The next issue is an improved conscientious objection provision, which gives doctors a chance to have some conversation with the person rather than having to immediately refer them if they have a conscientious objection.
And now that's important because in all the other states, if a doctor doesn't want to be involved in abortion, they're actually forced to. They're actually forced to participate by referring a woman to a doctor who will kill her unborn baby. But so you're saying that you've achieved a provision in law that doesn't require a doctor to do that?
No, not to refer. They have to provide, if there is some sort of information, like a piece of paper saying this is where you can get information.
Okay, so they still have to, potentially compromise their ethics, but not in the same full-on way that you have to in the other states by referring. So, as I said, this is a game of inches, and these are important inches you've achieved.
Yeah, and the last one was that the South Australia is the only jurisdiction that keeps stats. That's done by regulation at the moment, but now it's put into the Act. So there'll have to be yearly reporting, and Parliament is required within 12 days to produce that to the Parliament, so or the Minister. So some incremental gains, and so what we're saying to our people is we're sad, but we're joyful as well, because the work has got some. We've achieved something.
You've achieved a lot there, Christopher, and it may not seem like a lot to people who like all of us want to see abortion consigned to the dustbin of history, and women and mothers are given proper choices and proper care, but this has been such a hard-fought battle over decades, and the other side have just not given an inch for the last 50 years, essentially. So, suddenly we're seeing a whole bunch of dominoes falling. Okay, it's the ratchet principle. They're small, but these are very, very big concessions by comparison with what we've got over the last few decades, which is precisely zero.
Yep. And what these provisions are incrementally recognising is the humanity of the unborn child.
Exactly. The other side, that's why they're angry, I suppose, because all of these incremental concessions that you've achieved go to the heart of the issue, and that is we're dealing with a human life.
Yeah. And somebody sent me this, Lyle, which I'd just like to quote. Says, these changes might seem small, but because of them, some lives will exist which would not otherwise have existed. Parents and grandparents will be parents and grandparents which would not otherwise have happened. And a whole generation can ensue which would otherwise have not have been there. And so that's a supporter sent me that as an email today. That really encouraged me, because if we save one or two lives, that's massive. That is
Absolutely.
massive.
Yeah. Christopher, this is really heartwarming. I hope my audience is as warmed in their hearts as I am just talking to you now. Just in the little bit of time we've got left, just tell us about, this just didn't happen by accident. Yourself, and I know there was a coalition, there was a team, and, I've got you on today because I know you. But just tell us about the teamwork that went in over the last couple of years to get us to this point.
So we worked together in a coalition with the pro-life groups for the last 2 years. And that was significant because, as somebody said, a politician said to me, historically the pro-life groups end up fighting each other. And we didn't do that. We kept it together a movement spawned out of this called Love Adelaide, which run by Jodie Pickard and a group of others, and they ran the walk. They were the ones who were responsible for the walk, and that was a tremendous amount of work and energy to get that going, and that created a real buzz. Now, so we kept the groups together, or we stayed together, and we had this significant event. It's never happened, well, for years and years and years in Adelaide, we haven't had these numbers. We nearly didn't get permission from the health department, but we had a meeting with Senator Antic and myself and Love Adelaide people. And
Senator Alex Antich, the Liberal Party senator from South Australia in the federal parliament, who defied his state colleagues to help you guys, as I understand it.
He did a magnificent job. But also what it's done is going forward now, there's a lot of anger against the Liberal Party, because in this debate, uniquely in Australia, the leader of the opposition voted against the late-term proposals.
So the Labor Party leader of the opposition voted
against the late-term abortion proposals.
Wow. That is amazing.
Two of the key speakers in the whole debate were Tom Kutsentonis and Stephen Mulligan. It was Stephen Mulligan who moved that criteria amendment. And get this, the only woman who voted against the whole bill was Andrea Michaels, Labor from Enfield. That was hugely courageous of her.
That's incredible, Chris. Look, as a Queenslander, I watched how Jackie Trad, the former Deputy Premier for Labor, bludgeoned her colleagues into voting for the abortion to birth bill. And certainly there were no concessions. They gave no concessions here. And yet in South Australia, you've actually got Labor people helping lead the charge to get the concessions from a Liberal-led bill. Essentially, it was a Liberal Party-led initiative to get this up. So really the roles were reversed here. It's extraordinary. It's going to cause a lot of people to reevaluate their support of the Liberal Party, unfortunately. And I say that as a supporter of the Liberal Party.
Well, I spoke to a fellow from the country, a very strong Liberal Party area today, and he said people here are saying there's no way they're going to vote Liberal.
Wow.
And I'm sure that as a result of this, in some of the country areas, you'll get Conservative independents running. 3 Liberals in very marginal seats after voted for late-term abortion, despite their huge amount of their constituency not wanting them to do that. And so we will keep reminding them, their constituents. ACL can't support any candidates, but we can remind people how they voted, and we will do that up to the next election.
Yep, and that's fair enough. This is a democracy, and parliamentarians need to be accountable for their actions, particularly on such a horrendous piece of legislation like this. For what it's worth, obviously these days in my current life and activism, I'm encouraging people to stick with the Liberal Party and the Liberal National Party, in spite of their bad behaviour in a state like South Australia. Up here in Queensland, the party is very much pro-life and has stood strongly, apart from 3 of their state parliamentarians. But my encouragement would be, and I don't expect you to comment on this, Christopher, because I understand ACL's position very well, but I would hope that people would get behind Senator Alex Antich, the federal Liberal senator who defied his state colleagues. And I saw some media reporting that Nicole Flint, federal Liberal member of the House of Representatives, also had a bit of a tiff, if the media reports are to be believed, with her state colleagues. So there's certainly some strong pushback in the South Australian Liberals, and my encouragement would be not to give up on them, to get, use this as an opportunity to get involved in the party. And this is how it's been done in Queensland. Pro-life people got involved in the party and moved the motions at state conventions, which convinced the party to be pro-life. And I'm sure that could be done in South Australia with a bit of effort and a bit of organisation. I don't expect you to comment on that, Christopher, but appreciate that ACL is going to keep reminding people of what was done and hold them accountable.
Yep. And the only thing I would say is we encourage people to join both parties, because we need pro-lifers in the Labor Party.
we do, and it looks like South Australia, there's an openness towards the pro-life movement, which I know there's not in the other divisions of the Labor Party. It's just absolute hostility, unfortunately. Christopher, our time is up, but I really want to thank you for taking the time tonight out of your busy schedule to talk to us and to give us, that news. What you've just told us, I've been searching for this information in the mainstream media. It's just not there. I know you're going to put some detail up on the ACL's blog, acl.org.au, but thank you so much for walking us through the detail and for the incredible work that you and the pro-life movement in South Australia have done. You are heroes. I don't say that lightly, and I rejoice with the achievements that have been done. This is the beginning of the end for the abortion industry and for the big lie that has caused so much hurt and pain of women and of course, death of unborn babies. So congratulations, Christopher, on the enormous work, and thanks for being part of the show tonight.
Thanks, Lyle.
Well, joining me now is the federal member for Dawson, Basin, Mackay, George Christensen MP, good friend. He's joining us via telephone from Parliament House in Canberra. George, thanks for being with the Lyle Shelton Show tonight.
Thanks very much, Lyle. It's great to be on your show.
Well, I really appreciate it, George. And you're coming straight after Christopher Brohier from the Australian Christian Lobby, telling us about the South Australian abortion bill that passed last week. And of course, that was tragic. Abortion has been decriminalised there, but some significant concessions. And I look at this in terms of some progress is being made in a very grim area of public policy. And we've just heard about that from Christopher. But then hot on the heels of that, you're introducing a bill into the federal parliament that would in fact provide recognition of the humanity of an unborn baby that survives a botched abortion. Tell us about this bill that you've put on the table.
Well, as you said, it's the Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill. Now, it hasn't been introduced into the federal parliament yet. All I've done is I've had it drafted. Now, what does it do, and how is it that the issue of abortion, which most people say is a state issue, how is it that I can put it into the federal parliament? So what I've done is that the federal parliament has the constitutional power of external affairs. And one thing that has been tested before is the fact that we sign up to these international treaties. Now, we sign up to the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, and in that International Convention on the Rights of the Child, I think it's Article 6 of that convention, it states that every child shall have the right to life. And it goes on to say that state parties that sign up to this convention must do everything within their power to provide and to sustain the life of a child. It actually also goes on, and I think in Article 24, if I'm remembering correctly, it says words to the effect of that no child shall be discriminated against for the purposes of the provision of health services in a range of matters, including birth, so the method of birth. So when you look at those things, we've got to say that what is going on in a lot of public hospitals around the nation and private clinics is actually illegal. It's in breach of our international commitments.
Well, let's just back this up a bit, George, because you and I are familiar with this because we've followed the pro-life movement for many years. But what in essence you're talking about is babies who have survived an abortion procedure,
yes,
and then are then not rendered any medical care. Now, I'm sure a lot of our viewers will be thinking, well, does that actually really happen? But we know it does. And you and I, both know Nick Goiran from Western Australian Upper House member of the Liberal Party, and Dr. Mark Robinson from the Queensland Parliament. They have both documented cases of babies born alive and left to die. In the case of Mark Robinson here in Queensland, he's had the health minister admit to over 200 cases over a number of years. And you've done some further work through the Parliamentary Library, which validates that and has found even more examples of this happening.
So the figures that you're talking about that Mark Robinson MP found was between 2005 and 2015,
That's right.
204 babies were born alive as a result of botched abortions in the state of Queensland, and I'm not sure any of them were afforded life-saving medical care. And the Parliamentary Library done some digging for me, they found a range of different stats like this, but it's very, very difficult to get your hands on this information because it's not adequately recorded. So the numbers that we're getting are actually probably understated. In some states, we can't even find, anything that resembles any sort of relevant data on this. But in Victoria, in 2016, we know 33 out of 310 babies that were aborted after 20 weeks gestation were actually born alive. And again, nothing to say that there was any life-saving medical care that was provided to those children. In fact, it also says that they were all recorded as neonatal deaths, actually not even aborted babies. So the data is very, very unclear. But I want to just say one thing that we do know, Lyle, is that in Queensland, we have Queensland Health that issue clinical guidelines for what they call the medical termination of pregnancy. And in those guidelines, you can download it off the Queensland Health website. I can literally tell you the section, the table, the page number. Page 23 of the guidelines, table 22 under section 5.4.3 says this: if a live birth occurs, do not provide life-sustaining treatment, for example, gastric tubes, IV lines, oxygen therapy. Document date and time end of life occurs. So it's a clear guidance, state government guidance.
It says do not provide. Do not provide
medical
care.
Practitioners.
Yeah.
Do not let this child live. That's basically
terrible.
what they're saying.
So now,
and that's in breach of our international commitments. It quite clearly is.
Was that in the information you released last week, George? I read through those. I didn't see.
It was.
Okay, I must have missed it. What I did see was the Commonwealth guidelines, which was very similar to.
No, that was the state government guidelines actually.
Okay, I mistook that for the Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth has no such guidelines around this because all of this is done on a state basis. But that's just shocking.
Okay, so what I was reading there was the Queensland guidelines.
Indeed.
Okay, so that was my mistake. But it's shocking as it is, and I think you also showed that South Australia also has some chilling advice to do with babies in this sort of situation, which I think was unearthed during the South Australian abortion debate. Something to do with just wrapping the baby in a blanket and cuddling it until it dies.
Pretty much what their view was. I mean, up until now, and abortion's now been liberalised in South Australia, but with the caveat now that they're actually putting this protection that I'm talking about in place in South Australia. Sadly, it took the liberalisation of abortion laws for that to happen. But you're right. Before that, to quote from an answer that was provided to an MP during this sort of whole abortion debate, what's the policy in regards to a child born alive during a late-term abortion in South Australia? And the answer was the baby is wrapped in a blanket and the mother is given the opportunity to hold the baby as it dies.
How do we call ourselves a civil society when we know this is happening? And look, you and I both know that Nick Goiran has tried for years. He's tried to get the coroner involved in Western Australia, tried to get the government interested to investigate this properly. He just gets stonewalled. Mark Robinson gets similar treatment here in Queensland. And so it's high time that there was some action. And I think people will be heartened to see what you're doing, George. What sort of reaction have you had from your colleagues since you went public with this late last week?
Well, look, I got a response back from the Health Minister because I did flag this to the Prime Minister and Health Minister back in December that I was going to do this. He sent through, some information to me, which was pretty straight down the line. It just said that you may be able to find more data at a particular institute that the government fund on sort of neonatal deaths. And he did say that, look, any bill that we would consider would have to have the ruler run over it from the Solicitor General and get the appropriate sort of legal advice. So they didn't say yes, didn't say no, sort of a straight bat response. So I've sent them another letter, the same day I got their response from the December letter, and it's pretty more pointed, a letter that I've sent the Prime Minister, the Health Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister and the Attorney General. It asks them to pick up this private member's bill, to make it a government bill, or at the very least to actually allow it to go forward for a vote as a private member's bill, even if it's just a conscience vote. Because this just can't go on. We are, as I say, in breach of our international obligations. And what my bill will do, Lyle, is actually provide financial penalties to medical practitioners that do not provide the medical assistance to save a child's life, and it probably opens them up also to deregistration as a medical practitioner in Australia. And I think that's the least that can be done.
Yeah. I think you've handled this very cleverly, in that you have referenced these international human rights treaties like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which are all full of grandiose, words about how we, support the right to life and that this should be upheld by member states, yet of course is routinely ignored, but it's there in black and white, and Australia is a signatory to these conventions.
And the beauty of that, Lyle, is the left all the time pulls on these international treaties to make us do things. Well, I think it's about time that we started fighting fire with fire. Yeah. This is clearly what we've signed up to. I agree with this international convention. And so let's use it to get change. That's my view. And look, it's a long shot, man. I'm not going to stand here or sit here on the phone to you and pretend that, this bill is going to pass the Parliament 100%. But I can't just stand back and do nothing. I need to do something here.
Well, George, I'm gratified that you've done that, and pleased, as I'm sure all of our audience is. And you kindly launched my book last year, and I in the chapter I wrote on abortion, referenced the amazing work that Nick Goiran and Dr. Mark Robinson have done, who've really been running the ball up on this issue. I think you saw that, and you said on the night that you would look to have legislation drafted, and 6 or 8 months later, you've done just that. And I thank you for doing that, and I know our audience does as well.
Your book was a bit of a catalyst for spurring me on here. It's taken a long time because I've had to get the research done by the Parliamentary Library and the painstaking work of trying to get the right sort of legislative framework in place. But thank you for your book, I Kid You Not, which is a great read. If people want to read it, is the plug. But
thank you.
It did spur me on to draft this legislation. So thank you.
No, well, we thank you. And I read the bill over the weekend, and to see legislation put forward logically, referencing these human rights conventions, and to see that come forward, and someone with the courage to take it forward is just wonderful. What's the process from here, George? You mentioned you've notified the Health Minister, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister. It'd be great if it was a government bill. Good on you for pushing that. So who makes those decisions as to whether it becomes a government bill or whether it's a private member's bill, or whether they just say, sorry, George, go away, we're not going to give it any parliamentary airtime?
Yeah, look, a combination of cabinet and also the backbench government policy committees. And so I've also written to in addition to the ministers you named, the Attorney General, who would have oversight over this as well. And I've written to the chairman of the government backbench policy committees for legal affairs and also for health to seek their support. Look, I've given them until the 15th of March, and it's not like do it by then or else. I just need to have a finite time on this, so that I know whether or not. Yeah. Exactly. So I think that's enough to give them. And if they sort of say, look, we might consider it as a private member's bill that could get a conscience vote, well, we'll go forward with that. But if they respond with, no, we're not doing it, or they don't respond at all, I'll introduce it into the Parliament, and I'll introduce it probably towards the end of March.
Right. So you have the right as a member of Parliament, if for whatever reason the party mechanisms, don't, give you the carriage or the pathway that you'd like to, you have the right as a member of Parliament to stand up and say, this is a bill that I'm introducing, and to do that, and then it rises or falls based on the numbers in the Parliament.
Well, unfortunately, it is a little bit more lacklustre than that, actually. I'll get the right to introduce the bill, but in order for that bill to proceed any further, would need government support. So that's why it's critical. But at least the bill's there, lying on the table, and we can keep up the pressure to say, hey, what about this bill? What about this bill? So I'll introduce it to the Parliament, and look, if nothing's done with it, I'll bring it up in the next Parliament as well. Good if I'm still there. We'll just keep on running.
So George, what has been I saw this because I received a media release last Friday, and so presumably if your office has sent that out to a substantial media list, it's up on your website. This is very, very public. This is an issue that is hotly contested by the left of politics and some on the libertarian right. It's a hot button issue in Australian politics, always has been. In my Googling up until just before coming on air, I haven't seen any coverage at all of it. It's like it's being ignored and suppressed.
Well, I don't know that it has been, because I'll tell you why, is that I made a deliberate decision, actually, when promoting this initially, to promote it with the Christian media. And why did I do that? Because we know once you throw this sort of stuff out to the mainstream media, they tear it apart. So I want the friends of this action to know about it first and to have their reactions out there. And, there's been a few different organisations that have published it. Vision FM are going to run something on it soon. But we are going to throw it out to the media at large. I think some of them have picked it up off my Facebook. I'm wanting to do interviews tomorrow anyway.
Yeah, good.
But this week I'm going to be speaking about it in Parliament in an opportunity I've got.
Okay, when is that, George? When are you speaking in Parliament?
I'm going to be speaking on this matter, I think, on Thursday, actually. Thursday, of this week. So,
do you know roughly what time of the day, if people want to tune in and join the live, there's a live broadcast people can jump into off the Parliament's website?
Yeah, look, I think the opportunity is going to be in the Federation Chamber. So I'm not
it's broadcast. No, it is. I'm a regular on the parliamentary website, and you can click either the main chamber or the Federation Chamber. So that's where you'll be speaking.
This Thursday, probably around 12:45 Canberra time, I will be speaking on this bill. I won't be introducing this bill, but I'll be talking about the problem and this bill as the solution.
Fantastic. Well, I'll try and get some clips of your speech up for next week's Lyle Shelton Show. George, well, that's, it's interesting tactic, obviously going to the friendly media, the pro-life community, but nonetheless, the mainstream media do know about this. I know they watch your Twitter feed, and you're not on Twitter anymore, you should be, but your Facebook has a lot of traction, so they know about it.
Well, they may not know about it because they all got kicked off it, didn't they?
Well, that's true, and this is interesting. I mean, I blogged about your bill over the weekend and put it on my Facebook page, and that's all being suppressed by Mark Zuckerberg. So this is, I know that's a whole other issue, but just getting the news of this out is quite a challenge at the moment.
Yeah, well, we find that I don't have a dog in the fight of big tech versus big mainstream media in Australia, but we do find both entities just wanting to cancel Conservatives, and particularly on this issue. Look, I have no doubt when this is picked up by, the Guardians and the Fairfax Mail or the 9 newspapers and, even sadly the Australian, it's going to be written about in a negative light.
Yeah.
We just got to put up with that.
What can be negative about rendering medical care to a baby who survives a botched abortion? I mean, this is how insidious it is, this whole issue in itself, and how toxic it is. I mean, you're doing something. Okay, you and I are pro-life, but millions of Australians are. But something that is an abhorrent thing that we know is going on the edges of the abortion industry, and you're seeking to address that, and you're bracing for an onslaught from the mainstream media who will be trying to protect this grisly practice. I mean, Australia really is in a terrible place.
I agree. It's very sad. And they whatever side of the abortion debate you fall on, and I know both you and I fall firmly on the side of, we need to protect life inside the womb. But once the life is outside the womb, there is no disputing under any sort of framework, unless you're someone like Peter Singer, that believes in, infanticide, basically. But there is hardly anyone on the same sort of political spectrum that would deny that child born, regardless of the fact it was born as a result of a botched abortion, is actually a life. And so if you recognise it's a life, then you must say, well, you need to do something to save that life.
George, I'm sure, I don't remember whether when Gianna Jessen visited Australia, whether you were in the Parliament then, and I think I brought Gianna to meet you, as I did to 20 other parliamentarians, but she was a survivor of a botched abortion in America. It was a botched saline abortion, and the abortionist happened not to be there when she was delivered, supposedly to be aborted, and a nurse called the ambulance, and she's alive today. And I had the privilege of taking her to see over 20 senators and MPs about 10 years ago, but of course not even that moved the hearts of our parliament, unfortunately. So this is, we're not talking about hypotheticals here. We're talking about real people. I've met Melissa Oden, another one from America who also has visited our country advocating for human rights for the unborn. And yet hearts are very hard when it comes to this issue.
Yeah, they certainly are. I think people are just extremely polarised about it. And, if it's got anything to do with abortion, we'll just take one side or the other. And I'd say to anyone that's sort of pro-abortion, actually look at what this bill is trying to do. It's got nothing to do with stopping a woman wanting to procure an abortion. It's got nothing to do with stopping doctors from actually undertaking that abortion. What it does is it puts an obligation, a legal obligation, on a doctor or any medical practitioner that's undertaking an abortion or that is present during an abortion, to actually provide that life-sustaining treatment to a human being, a fragile human being. That's what it's asking.
Well, that's right, and that's entirely logical, but of course that logic has to be extrapolated because logic always does, and it's telling our society that really we're doing something that we shouldn't really be doing, and I think that's why it's going to be so fiercely opposed. I'd encourage people to watch out, watch the media coverage of what you're doing in the Parliament over these next few days. George, that's all we have time for today, but I really want to thank you for your courage, and obviously we acknowledge the courage of Nick Goiran and Mark Robinson, and I think it's terrific that we're seeing some positive steps forward.
Before I go, can I quickly just say, if people want to support the bill,
I've got
a website up, georgechristensen.com.au/born alive, all one word, BORNALIVE.
And we'll put that link on the screen, and really encourage, I've gone and signed up to it. I'd encourage everyone to do that. It's so important that George has our support there. George Christensen, thank you so much for being with us today on the Lyle Shelton Show.
Thanks, Lyle.
Well, thanks very much for your company today on The Good Source and the Lyle Shelton Show. It's been a pro-life special. It's been extraordinary seeing what is actually starting to happen. Despite what seemed to be defeat after defeat, we're actually seeing a fight back. And you've seen that tonight through the incredible work of Christopher Brohier and the coalition of pro-life organisations there in South Australia. Real progress is being made because the other side has overreached. And of course, the heroic George Christensen, what a treat and a privilege to have him on the show. And we'll keep you up to date with the developments of his bill. And we'll bring you some clips next week from his speech in Parliament. Well, thanks again for your company. If you're in South Australia, I'll be in Adelaide next week, launching my book, I kid you not, Notes from 20 Years in the Trenches of the Culture War. And the Liberal Senator Alex Antich has kindly agreed to do the honours on that night. And we'll be encouraging people to engage the political process as a result of the talks that we'll be giving that night. Already 100 people have registered, so if you'd like to come, shoot me an email at lyle@lyleshelton.com.au, and I'll make sure you get an invitation to that event. Well, thanks again. I look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at this week's Church and State Summit with Dave Pello, and I'm sure people can register for last-minute tickets or for the online version of the conference there at Church and State. Just Google Church and State and we'll put that up on the screen. Thanks a lot. Thanks for being with us. Good night and God bless.
The Lyle Shelton Show is a production of The Good Source, hosted by Lyle Shelton. To watch, listen to, or read more content without the SJW PC fact filter, visit goodsource.news. Good, SAUCE.news. Become a Good Source supporter for exclusive access to live and unedited interview recordings, including the conversations before and after the show.